Good morning. Let's call this meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Gonzalez is absent. McCann is absent. Donovan?
Here.
Montgomery Stepp? Here. Coble?
Here.
Leyva Gonzalez?
Here.
Dillard?
Here.
Gastel?
Here.
Bush is absent. Frank is absent. Moreno is absent. Elo Rivera is absent. Campillo?
Here.
Whitburn? Hall?
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Let's begin with non-agenda public comment. This provides 2 minutes for anyone who would like to comment on something that is not on today's agenda, but is within the purview of MTS. Here, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
Alex Wong, please unmute yourself now. Alex, it looks like you're
sorry, yes, I'm here. Perhaps you could go to, oh, yes, sorry. Good morning, MTS board. My name is Alex Wong, and I'm data researcher for RIDE SD. At November's board meeting, board member Ron Haw said the trolley is MTS's brand and that the People Mover was going to change that brand. In reality, passengers care much more about transit frequency than whether the transit vehicle is a trolley or a people mover. Most people aren't bus fans or trolley fans or people mover fans. They just want to get from point A to point B with as little waiting time as possible. That's why a people mover coming every 2 minutes will attract more riders than the airport trolley, which would come only every 15 minutes. Here's a quote from transit planner Christoph Spieler. At the intersection of Jeffrey and 71st in Chicago, rail meets bus. Metro Electric and the Jeffrey Jump Bus both stop here and both take about 20 minutes to go downtown. But the bus runs every 5 to 16 minutes during the day, and the train runs every 20 minutes at best, and once an hour for much of the day. Approximately 100 people a day board the train here. Nearly 1,000 board the bus. Riders care more about frequency than they do about mode. Yes, the Metro Electric train looks way cooler than the Jump Bus. The Metro Electric has tracks, bogies, and overhead wires. It has that clickety-clack sound as it runs down the tracks. It's a smoother, quieter ride than the bus. Like the trolley, it evokes far more nostalgia than the boring old city bus. But commuters don't care about nostalgia because transit is not a theme park ride. Passengers are not on vacation, willing to endure long waits to board a nostalgic theme park vehicle. Instead, passengers are hurrying to get to work, school, and appointments, and wait times only add stress that they will be late to their destination. To that end, an ultra-frequent people mover would massively boost MTS's brand, because MTS's brand ultimately isn't trolley nostalgia. Rather, MTS's brand is about ultra-frequent, ultra-convenient service.
Next is 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
It's true. Wouldn't it be great if MTS's brand really was about getting people places on time? Yeah, that would be great, right? All right, last meeting, Sharon, you said do it by themselves, referring to children having their photo taken and giving their personal information to MTS without parental knowledge. Well, I say that's an outrageous crime. There needs to be parental consent to anything of that nature. Oh, and by the way, I meant to say, the volume of your guys' attendance, I could barely hear it. I don't even know who's there. It sounded like nobody was there, actually. And Steve, last meeting, I did appreciate your temporary disability explanation. I personally would never give MTS my information or label myself temporarily disabled. I'm also fully recovered, and I don't recommend anyone ever try going uphill some parts of downtown without a knee scooter that has 4-wheel drive, seriously. And even though I love to mess with you guys about your wonderful honor system, when I do decide to risk my life and ride that criminal getaway car known as the trolley, I do make sure to give MTS more than just 2 cents. And according to the audit, I'm one of only 19% that actually do that. You're welcome. I was happy to see criminal stabber Angelina Montes Strickland caught and going to prison, but a measly 5 years for attempted murder, that's a real crime. But we know she probably won't even stay long. Maybe she'll even work for the government soon, because there are more criminals there than in prison. Prove me wrong. And Tuesday, I heard from Nora Vargas, who, by the way, I don't know if you guys know, she's an MTS absentee always.
2 seconds left.
That MTS will be giving out free transit passes to storm survivors. And I think that's great, but I'm curious, how are the survivors going to be found at this point of displacement? Has anyone figured that one out? That's pretty bad. And how about we play a a fun video. This is for Steve. I don't even know if he's there, but we got to remember this when you do operations that affect people's lives. Let me see if I can get this clip going.
Some of our worst.
That concludes public comment, Chair. Oh, Louis Pruitt. Please make your way to the podium.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My comment is just once again dealing with the 901 Express. If we could, I mean, as a plea, if we could do this, it'd be very good for the Imperial Beach. It'll be something good Monday through Friday. If we can, if anybody can really take a look at it and see how it operates. If you would give it just 3 months, try it for 3 months and see how it goes. But it'd be good. It'd be good for the city. It'd be good for Imperial Beach. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Let's move on to our consent items, which are items 3 through 10. Clerk, is there any public comment on the consent items?
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
All right, item 3, I thoroughly enjoyed reading the minutes. Item 4 is over $989,000 for fasteners. Lord, fasteners is now in China. Isn't that great what GATT, NAFTA, and the USMCA caused? Good riddance to them. Hello to Nortec. Item 5 is $175,000 more to a $3.1 million contract for software and systems, but is MTS giving ADP $50,000 just to change their name? Item 6 is another $300,000 for employee background checks by Kelly Investigative Services. Interesting to know that MTS has a high turnover rate like everybody else. Sorry, my generation doesn't want to work anymore, and that older generations don't show loyalty to their employees anymore. But I'm curious if any of you on the board go through a background check. Item 7 is $335,000 for liability and workers' comp. Munich RE doesn't want to insure MTS because the brokers say, quote, there is very limited appetite among insurers to provide public transit risk in California because the exposure to loss is high and litigation costs are expensive, end quote. Translation, the cost of public transit to taxpayers is way higher than people realize. Item 8, you guys are still overspending your budget by over $1 million. And I imagine it's going to go up even more because of the storm damage. And passenger revenue, 90% of people continue not to pay for their unsafe and inefficient rides, so MTS lost over $2.2 million. My spare change is the only thing keeping MTS afloat. And I will say you guys tried hard to meet the energy budget, though. Item 9 is 2 more bus operator training instructors at $204,000 a year. That's pretty high. Go ahead and blame inflation, but that's actually the same salary a low to mid-level auditor makes at Sandag. And item 10 is $1.9 million to the Pun Group for an audit. That's some audacity. I want an Operation Shakedown audit of you board members. It'd be for your safety, Steve, of course, especially regarding office supply purchases, Sharon. Somebody should look into that. Thank you very much.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Do we have a motion to approve the consent items?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a discussion on the consent items. Seeing aye. All those opposed say nay. That passes unanimously. All right, that brings us to item 11, which is the San Diego Transit Corporation.
Good morning, Mike Thompson. I'm the Director of Financial Planning and Analysis. First one is our San Diego Transit Employees Pension Plan. Every year we bring 2 presentations to you, one to review the investment performance for the fiscal year ending at 6/30/2023. That will be Jeremy with RVK. And then our second one will be our actuaries, Ann Harper and Alice Alsberg from Chiron. They will present the valuation report out of 6/30/2023. And that will be, the second one will be an action item. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone. As Mike noted, I'll go through a fiscal year review of the investment portfolio. And we'll start talking a little bit about the structure and then get into performance. On the first slide, let's see here. you go. We can see the investment structure as a fiscal year end. You can see the plan is diversified across 4 broad asset classes. Our goal for the portfolio is, of course, to maximize returns, but while also assuming a prudent level of risk. We want the assets, which are there to satisfy the liabilities, to make sure there's an alignment between those two. And so one thing we need to take into account is the closed nature of the plan, which happened a little over 10 years ago. And so what we see with these risk numbers here is just a sense of how we've tried to lower the risk over time, again, to better align the assets with the liability profile. And that liability structure is a fairly mature plan, which you'll hear a little bit about after this presentation. And so the asset structure is more conservative, diversified, and liquid in nature to align with that. And we've also taken some steps to help reduce fees as we've gone through this process through the use of passive investments. On the next slide, we look at investment details. So this goes from the broader picture of asset classes and drills down a little more detail to the investment managers products that you are invested in, which is across 10 different products to provide the portfolio with diversification, but also to reduce concentration risk by not having too much money with one particular investment style. We do know that there is one change that you'll see coming up next year, where we made the change with the PIMCO All Asset again to further move into bonds to align with liabilities, but also to take advantage of the higher interest rates that will help your portfolio going forward. On the next slide, we get into performance. In fiscal year 2023, we saw a strong rebound in U.S. and international stocks, but it was very concentrated, particularly in growth stocks, very much so in technology, and even more so if you looked at what we would call mega cap stocks, so very, very large companies by market capitalization. So it was a very narrow rebound, very much tied to growth technology and mega cap. Bonds continue to underperform, but again, that underperformance, the silver lining means interest rates are going up, which you can take advantage of that going forward. The end result was the plan returned 7% in fiscal year 2023. Your assumed actuarial rate is 6%, so you are ahead of your actuarial rate of return by 1% during fiscal year 2023. Keep going, okay. On a long-term basis on the next slide, you can see beyond last year and obviously year to year, we're going to get fluctuations. Some years are going to be above your actuarial. San Diego Transit has outperformed, and we think going forward again, those tend to be an anchor portfolio, but now we think it'll be a tailwind. So in summary, we think the plan is well diversified across both managers and asset classes. We think the asset allocation is well aligned with the liability structure, including the closed nature of the plan. We've tried to lower investment manager fees through the use of passive vehicles. And we think today's current structure will have a tailwind. It aligns with the liability and will have a tailwind as we see higher interest rates. So far through fiscal year 2024, you're at 4.9%. So you're about halfway through this fiscal year, and you're obviously pretty darn close to your 6% hurdle already. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not.
Okay, thank you, Clerk. This was an informational item, so no motion is needed. We'll open board discussion on this if there is any on this item. If not, we'll move on to the next related item. Seeing no discussion. Item 12 then is the San Diego Transit Corporation Employee Retirement Plans Actuarial Evaluation as of July 1st, 2023. And we're going to have some representatives from Chiron, present this item along with Mike Thompson again. And once you get settled in, please go ahead and begin your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ann Harper, and I'm here with Alice Alsberg, and we are the retirement plans actuaries. So we are here to present to you the results of our July 1, 2023 actuarial evaluation. So we are going to first go through this revised actuarial standard of practice. That's do some light housekeeping, if you will. And this is just something that we want to go over with you because there will be an additional disclosure in your actuarial evaluation report, so that if you have anyone asks you questions about it, you'll understand that there's this new disclosure. And then we are going to also do a pension overview. And then when we get into the meat of the discussion, we touch on 3 different topics for the valuation results. The first is, where is the plan right now as of the valuation date? And then we look at a little bit of history. And then most importantly, we look at where the plan is going and what the future looks like in terms of your contributions and your funded status. So this actuarial standard of practice that got revised is number 4, and it's called Measuring Pension Obligations and Determining Pension Plan Costs or Contributions. So it's really the most relevant and most important standard of practice that we follow as pension actuaries. And as the one thing about this revision, it hasn't been done, revised or updated in over 10 years. But we do have most of these disclosures that it calls for already in your valuation report. The one thing that we need to include this year and have included is called a low default risk obligation measure, and we call it the LD-ROM. And it's just a disclosure. It's another liability measure that we need to include in the report, and it has absolutely no impact on determining plan contributions or your funded status. What it does dictate is that we must use a discount rate or assumed rate of return when we're discounting your pension benefits. That must be derived from a low default risk income security. And in layman's terms, that really means something like a U.S. Treasury rate or a high quality corporate bond yield. And what we are using as a firm, we're using what's called a FTSE Pension Liability Index. And as of June 30th, that rate was 4.9%, and we're rounding it to the nearest 0.25%. So we need to disclose your liabilities using a 5% return. So communicating what this LD-ROM means in layman's terms, I'm going to go through this slide presentation here. First, you see the value of that gray bar that represents the value of your undiscounted cash flows attributable to past service liability. So it's all your retiree liability, benefit payments, and it's your active members, what they've accrued to date. So that's the value of those undiscounted cash flows if you stuffed all that money into a mattress, under a mattress, or into a drawer. But we know that you don't do that, right? Jeremy was just up here discussing your diversified portfolio. Your pension funds are invested in a diversified portfolio. And so for the funding valuation, what we do is we discount the liability or the cash flows. We discount those cash flows using that expected rate of return on your diversified portfolio, which is 6%. And so the value of the expected returns in the future are represented by that green bar, the green portion of that bar. And then your actual accrued liability is the dark blue. So what the LD-ROM is saying is that if you took all of that money in your diversified portfolio, sold it all off and invested in bonds or low default risk securities, you would have a much lower expected return because you're taking most of the risk off the table, right? So you're going to have a lower return. And so that's the LD-ROM valuation represents that discounting at that lower return. So the LD-ROM liability is going to be higher this year anyway than your actuarial liability. And so communicating that it's another thing we have to do based on the ASAP is communicating what we believe the significance of this is. And we take a very positive spin on this by saying that the difference between those returns is your expected savings to the taxpayer and to the employers, because you have taking advantage of that diversified portfolio and higher investment earnings. And one other way of looking at that is also, it would be the cost if you did sell off all of your diversified portfolio and invested into a fixed income portfolio, would be the cost of significantly minimizing your investment risk. Are there any questions on that before we move on?
So before presenting the results of an annual actuarial valuation, we like to take a step back and look at it at an illustrative version of what that actuarial valuation is to begin with. So in a valuation, every year on July 1st of the year, so in this case, July 1st, 2023, we gather all of the census information for the members in the plan, the active members, the terminated members, the retirees. And with that membership group, we calculate the actuarial liability. And in this depiction, this tank is the size of or the value of the actuarial liability. And when we look at that actuarial liability, using all of the assumptions that go into these calculations, we compare it to the assets in the system. And the ultimate goal of the pension plan is to have enough money to pay for those future benefits for the retirees. So we look at the size of the tank, the liabilities, compared to the assets in the tank in order to determine the funded status of the plan. And the difference between the top of the tank and the level of water, the assets, is the unfunded actuarial liability. And that unfunded actuarial liability needs to be caught up or filled in with contributions to the plan and investments. So the plan as a whole, in the bottom of the tank, we see that water or assets leave the system through benefit payments. And the money must be in the system to pay those promised future benefits. In addition to leaving the system, there's also the expected administrative expenses. And coming into the system, we have contributions from the employer, and we have contributions from the employees, and we have the investment returns. And the big picture of all of this is to achieve that balance so that the fund is stable and the money is available to pay those benefits when promised, when due. So when we calculate your annual actuarially determined contribution for the year, that's focusing on the lever of employer contributions. So what contributions need to come into the system from the employer to fund the balance of the liabilities? So we zoom in here on those employer contributions. So the employer contributions are made up of three components. So these are annual contributions that are comprised of the normal cost, a UAL payment, and expected administrative expenses. So that normal cost, what that means is, what's the cost of the benefits that active members are accruing on an annual basis? And for this system, for the SDTC retirement plans, that normal cost is decreasing now year over year because the plan is largely closed, and it's been closed for just over 10 years. So that normal cost component of the annual contributions is slightly decreasing. The next component is the unfunded actuarial liability payment, or UAL, and that's that difference in the tank. So from the water line to the top of the tank, that unfunded needs to be paid for. And that gets paid for through the plan's funding policy the funding policy that's established by you to say that those unfunded amortization payments are made on an annual basis in a layered approach. Those closed layers initially had various years, but now as we're approaching the target of full funding, so the full funding policy says by 2038, the plan is expected to reach 100%. So those assets are going to reach the top of the tank. And with that, every year when we perform an actuarial valuation, we look at what happened compared to what was expected to happen, add on new layers of unfunded amortization payments to reach that, that target of full funding. And then third is expected administrative expenses. So that's managing and administering the plan.
So now getting into the meat of the numbers and what happened in our valuation this year. This is a reconciliation of where we were last year and where the contribution is this year. So last valuation, the contribution was $18.9 million, and that's being paid for this fiscal year in 2024. For the July 1st, 2023 valuation, the contribution increased to about $20.2 million. And we expected that to actually go up by about $600,000, 662 to be exact. And that's because we had some deferred asset losses that we're recognizing over the course of the next 4 years. We do an actuarial smoothing of your assets. So what we do is we take each year, we don't recognize the full gain or loss to your system, depending on what your investment return was. We phase that in over a 5-year period so that the contribution levels can remain smooth. So we did expect it to go up, but we did have an asset gain this year, a small one, and that decreased the contribution by about $20,000. So a net increase due to your investment experience of $642,000. There was also some actuarial liability experience that we saw, and that's that size of the tank, and that was mainly attributable to active salary increases. There were more than expected, more than our assumption. The average salary went up about 6.5%, which is great news for the employees. The ATU actually went up even higher than that, closer to 8.5%. So it's good news for the employees. They have higher salaries. Their pension benefits as a result of that are expected to be higher, but that does come to as a cost to the plan. So that increased the contribution by about $600,000. And just to note here is your funding policy is to have every, that whole UAL paid for by the 2038 valuation. So now we're at this time where all of our amortization layers, when we start them, are now they're 14 years for this valuation. So when we go forward for the next valuation, it's going to be 13 years. So it's a shrinking period for future gains or losses. And so what that means is that your contribution is going to become more and more sensitive to experiencing gains and losses because you're paying it off over a shorter period of time to become fully funded at that target date. Then there was a decrease in your contribution because fewer benefits are being earned by your active membership. And it's not because your members that are continuing to be active are earning fewer benefits. It's that people, when they leave the system, right, when they retire, we're no longer paying that normal cost portion of the benefit. So that's a downward pressure on your contributions each year. And then there was a miscellaneous $130,000 and just other miscellaneous factors. And here we are showing the PEPRA member contribution rates. So their plan is mostly closed except for some non-contract PEPRA members. And PEPRA is that legislation that went into place back in 2013, where the members have to pay half of their cost of their benefits or half of their normal cost. And we just wanted to point out here that that rate did come down this year from 9.5% to 9%. And the biggest reason that that came down is that the normal cost is based on an aggregate, like higher age where these members entered your system. And that average higher age decreased from about 40 to down to 38. So there's a longer period of time where they're funding their own benefits and you're funding their benefits. And that longer period of time means you make shorter contributions. So that's the takeaway here, is that it decreased by about 0.5% for those members. And the current IBW and ATU members and the non-contract members who are not PEPRA, they do pay 8% of pay. So that's just the pay structure of your system and the members.
So as Anne mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, when we present the results of an actuarial valuation, not only do we look at the current results, which is that 20.2 million contribution for the fiscal year, but we also like to look at the historical pattern of contributions to have context of what that 20.2 million looks like comparatively. So here we're showing contributions over the last 10 years. So the top of the bars are the contributions for the year. And in 2014, those contributions were at 12.5 million. Based on the results of this year's valuation, the contribution will be 20.2 million. And what we're showing here is a period of assumption changes with the different shaded bar colors to show how that contribution has grown from the or why that contribution has grown from the 12.5 to the 20.2 that it is today. And over the period of this 10-year period, the assumptions, the underlying assumptions that value those liabilities have been strengthened to better reflect expectations. And the key assumption that's been strengthened along the way is the reduction of the discount rate. So we see here in 2016, the discount rate was reduced from 7.5% to 7%. And a reduction like that, 0.5% in the discount rate, resulted in an increase of about 2.5 million on the contributions. And because that amount is paid as a fixed level dollar payment, that 2.5 million additional will continue for 15 years as we continue to see that teal section. And periodically, when we perform experience studies, reevaluate the assumptions that are used, there were other changes. So in 2019 and in 2021, there were further reductions to that discount rate. So the plan currently today stands at a 6% discount rate, which is a very reasonable estimation discount rate given the largely closed nature of the system. And then in addition, the mortality assumptions were strengthened. So within our profession, mortality and longevity of life is very key assumption that gets studied. And periodically, the Society of Actuaries reviews those assumptions. And it was in the 2016 valuation that those assumptions were strengthened and continue to hold today. So we see the accumulation of the contributions based on the strengthening of the assumptions. And we feel that today's valuation with that 22.2 million is a very accurate depiction of the assumptions into the future as well. Here we're taking a look. So we like to focus really two metrics. We look at that, what's the contribution for the year, and then what's the funded ratio. And the funded ratio is what percent of the tank is full of assets, is full of money. So in the beginning of this 10-year period in 2014, the plan was 64% funded. So that means that the tank was 64% full. So the top of the bars are the liabilities, and the line here is the assets with the percentage showing the funded ratio or the percentage of assets to liabilities. Currently, in 2023, the tank or the funded ratio is 57.2%. And that 57.2%, while it's lower than the 10-year prior, it takes into account those series of discount rate assumption changes, which is very vital to solidifying the assumptions and the value of that liability. And so when we take a look at the projections, we'll see that although it's sitting at 57.2%, the funding policy of the plan is strong and working and is going to work towards increasing that funded ratio, provided that the contributions continue coming into the system as per that funding policy. Here we're showing how the membership group and the liabilities have shifted over the last 10 years. Since the plan is largely closed, in 2013, that bright gold, We saw in 2013, the membership group was about 41% actives. And today it's only about 20% active compared to retirees and non-active members. And when you look at that head count compared to the liabilities, you see a similar ratio there of actives to inactives. So as the plan moves farther down away from the closing period, the plan is moving towards more retirees, more inactive members, and we're going to continue to see the decrease there in that active population.
So turning towards the projections and what the future looks like for your plan based on the assumptions in your funding policy, we're first looking here at the projected funded ratio, which is projection of assets and liabilities. The funded ratios are the percentages at the top of those bars, and the bars represent the plan's liabilities. And you can see that they've kind of reached a plateau in 2023, and they are going to slowly start declining over time because of the closed nature of your system. While the assets, however, are going to slowly increase over time as you earn investment earnings and contributions are going into the fund. So the line represents the assets. The actual value of assets, those smooth assets, are a little bit higher than your market value because you have some of those deferred losses that you'll be recognizing over the next few years. And that's kind of putting a little bit of a drag on the funded ratio. It is expected to increase every year, but once those deferred losses are fully recognized, you're going to see a lot more improvement in your funded ratio, like 2 or 3% going forward. And these projections assume that all actuarial assumptions are met each and every year, assuming you're going to earn that 6% rate of return each and every year, and that the contributions are being made to the plan. So we are projecting you to be 100% funded by 2037 when that final UAL is fully paid off. Then here we're looking at the projected contributions for the system. You can see that the fiscal year end 2025, which is the current valuation, the 20.2 million in contributions is going to increase just a little bit over the next 3 years as those deferred losses are continued to be recognized, so that it peaks at 21.3 million, and then it will slowly decline as more and more members are leaving the system, and that the normal cost is decreasing until you get to about 13.6 million in 2038. And when that UAL is paid for, your contributions will drop to just that normal cost and administrative expense level. So finally, we're showing here a stochastic projection. And what that is where we run simulations, thousands and thousands of simulations of investment returns based on your plan portfolio and the risk in your diversified portfolio. And you can see here that over time, the range of what those expected contributions are widens, and it widens because of the uncertainty that is in the volatility of the markets. That black line represents a similar projection that we just showed in the previous slide of the median return or the median of all of those outcomes. So you can see that there is going to be a range of expected contributions. It's not that just one line is going to represent what's going to happen. What is specifically notable here is that in 2038, the last year before that UAL is fully paid, is that the contribution range does increase significantly. And that is because your funding policy currently, any gains or losses in that last year were paid off 100% in that year. So that's why you're seeing that spike. So as we get closer and closer to that point, we may want to revisit looking at ways to mitigate that spike there. But we're far enough away now that we want to stay on course with your current policy to have everything paid for by 2039.
And with that, before we get to questions and comments, I'll read the staff recommendation is that the Board of Directors receive this Centennial Transit Employee Retirement Plan actuarial evaluation as of July 1, 2023, and adopt the pension contribution amount of $20,174,660 for fiscal year 2025.
Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Hey guys, I thought I'd comment to help everyone stay awake during this meeting. What caught my attention was the phrase "cash under the mattress." MTS doesn't have that, right? They have quarters under the mattress actually. Then there was the visual tank of tank to water. I appreciate that from the presenters. Good job. Because that's something else that caught my attention. But what happens if the infrastructure isn't maintained? That's a City of San Diego joke, also a reality. As long as MTS maintains their tank, they're going to be okay, I think. However, this item did say, quote, "The fundamental risk to a pension plan is that contributions needed to pay the benefits become unaffordable," end quote. Tributes for benefits. Then you add in debt, dollar inflation, salary increases, and we call that the cost of socialism. And its flags for this presentation came in gold bars, gray bars, and navy lines rather than the usual red. Something else I kind of found funny was Winklevoss Technologies. Isn't that name kind of interesting? On the positive, I didn't find anything nefarious about the companies. There was also a FTSE liability. Did anybody catch that one? And this item says that IBEW members contribute 8% of compensation. And I'm going to argue they should probably contribute even more since they've got enough money that they can pay for multiple sales tax measures, one of them on the upcoming voter ballot. Meanwhile,
30
everybody
seconds left.
gets higher salaries, all based on unsustainable inflation. And so I didn't see a list of it, but I'm going to say good luck with your business investments. We'll see how that goes. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. We will now open board discussion on this item. This is an action item, so a motion would be in order, and we will begin with Member Campillo.
Thank you, Chair Whitburn, and thank you very much for the presentation. I just have a question about the discount rate. One of your statements was that one of the strengthened assumptions of the model is that we've reduced the discount rate to 6%. The discount rate is essentially another way of saying what we predict the long-term return of the funds will be over time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The previous presentation showed that the long-term performance details that over 41 years, which is a long period of time, but we had 8.4%. Over the past several years, there's been a lot of fluctuation, particularly in the 10-year performance, which was 4.8%. So I understand why the discount rate might be lower, but is there a reason that it's at 6%, particularly when we're looking at over the long-term horizon? We're far closer to we're at 8.4% return?
Yeah, so that's a good question. When we set economic assumptions, we look forward to what is going to be happening in the future, not the past.
Sure.
So when you're looking at the past, those historical rates have embedded in them when the bond markets were earning 8 to 12%, right? So you could invest in that low risk portfolio and get 8% return, right? So the markets are so different now, right? And they have been changing in the last couple of years also. So what we do when we set that discount rate is we look at what Jeremy shows us is how the funds are invested in their asset classes, and we look at all of the capital market assumptions associated with those, and you basically come up with an expected return based on how your assets are invested. So you have become more and more conservative in your investments because it is a closed plan, right? So the allocation is going more and more towards the fixed income. So when we set that 6% rate of return, it was a few years back, we looked at what was the assumed rate of return based on the current market conditions, and it was right around 6%. So that's how we determined that.
Understood. No, that makes complete sense. You're trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. But now since we've seen since we've set it to 6%, we've shown that our plan has returned better than that. Why do we continue to say, essentially you said, we got to look into the future. Several years ago, you looked into the future and we undershot based on what the discount rate. So why are we going to continue to keep it low instead of analyzing maybe a different model, or perhaps looking at
Well,
But
when
just,
you-
I'm sorry,
well,
one,
no,
one, it
okay.
just seems that the argument that we should keep it low always says we got to look into the future. But if we go back to where we were 5 to 10 years ago and look into the short-term future, we undercut it. So why are we keeping it so low?
Well, when you say undercut it, I thought when Jeremy was showing that a 10-year return was only, was it, what did you say, 4.2% over the 10-year period?
10 years is 4.8.
4.8,
And-
which is lower, right? than-
Well, sure, but that is accounting for the fact, well, yeah, but it goes up and down over the course of time, right? If you were to count for 12 years, if you were to count to 15 years, looking at it at a single percent spot isn't necessarily the right way to, I mean, without getting a sense of what the return is every single year, we could adjust the discount rate on a year-by-year basis, couldn't we?
You definitely could adjust it on a year-by-year basis, given what the expectations are going forward. And I do want to make a point that the discount rate does determine what the cost of the discounted benefit payments are, right? And so you have higher discounted benefit payments because it's a low discount rate compared to other systems per se. But what really does matter is what the actual investment earnings are. So when in our valuation process, every year when we look at that UAL, if let's say the system earns 15% one year, well, you actually will get a credit on that UAL and you'll contribute less.
Yep.
So the valuation is a self-adjusting process so that it does take into account the actual returns. The discount rate really is just almost like a budgeting lever.
Right.
Right? So, and where it's set right now is you hope to exceed that expected return more than 50% of the time so that you're going to build in, hopefully you're
Yes.
going to have actual gains in the future.
Understood.
And
I think, just very briefly, I think what would be helpful in analyzing where that is, particularly for the long term, is understanding the variance year over year. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but knowing what the standard deviation away from that prediction so that we can get a sense of getting it as close to correct as possible would be helpful, because when you do lower the discount rate, it has effects in terms of contribution,
Definitely.
which is, is partly employer, partly employee, right? So I think as we analyze this going into the future, that would be my request to sort of see just where that flow is and how far off we are year by year, so that maybe we could, I don't know, shorten that difference off of whatever the long-term curve would be. I understand why it is low. I understand we have a closed pension, which is a difficult thing to deal with because we don't have as many, we don't have employees going into it, correct? So with that, in the future, I'll be asking that question again. But with that, Chair, I'm happy to move staff's recommendation, and thank you.
Thank you, Member Campillo. Member Moreno.
Thank you for the presentation, and you're looking at the reason why that was lowered. Previous to being budget chair, I had asked for us to consider lowering that number, which proved to be very fiscally prudent, given some past years that were not as good. So you're looking at the fiscal conservative reason of why this is happening. I know I never thought I would say that about myself, but that was something, that was an action that I asked for, I moved, and certainly the body can decide what to do. But that was my recommendation, and it continues to be my recommendation, given the volatility of the stock market. So, thank you.
Thank you, Member Moreno. Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the 6% discount rate. You described it as a budgeted amount for the plan. When you lower the discount rate, does that mean that you have to increase the contributions from the combination of employer-employee, because you have to hit this certain amount of contribution to feed the plan? It sounds kind of counterintuitive. If I lower my expectations on my investment return, you still have the same expenses. Somebody has to make up the difference, right? Now, to Mr. Campillo's point, what about years when you exceed 6%? Does that result in a lower contribution from the participants in the employer?
yes, it
Yes.
does. And
The employee contributions are not based on the asset returns. Those are collectively bargained. And for the Pepper members, it's just based on the normal cost. So, but go ahead, Alice.
So we saw in an earlier slide when we presented the reconciliation of the prior year's contribution to the current year's contribution, there was an element that showed the returns above expected for this year served to decrease that contribution, but there is still, due to actuarial asset smoothing techniques, there's still a loss that's on the books, a deferred loss that's coming into play over a course of, it's a 5-year period to smoothen the losses. And so in aggregate, we do have the positive years, we have the negative years. Currently, we're sitting on deferred losses, which means there were more years where we did not hit that 6% rather than exceeding the 6%.
Yeah, in the last 5 years.
Yes.
So Director Moreno, I commend you for the fiscal conservatism, because what that does is it lowers the expectations of the return. And if we beat that, it means MTS doesn't have to put in as much money into the plan, which is taxpayer money, because the market made the money. So by lowering that expectation, you've really set the taxpayers up to win. And that's a great way to look at this thing.
And if I may, we're asked to perform periodic experience studies. So we do those on a cyclical basis. So every 3 to 5 years, we assess all of the assumptions. But on an annual basis, we do turn to RVK, to Jeremy, to look at the expectations on the discount rate to make sure that we're still in line with expectations. And although on an annual basis, the discount rate or the expected return assumption fluctuates, the idea behind an actuarial valuation, our assumptions, is the steady tanker of setting those assumptions to limit volatility, to have that contribution predictability, to have the stability for the system.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. We have a motion by Member Campillo, and we have a second by Vice Chair Goebel. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Chavez,
Yes.
Donovan,
Yes.
Montgomery Steppe,
Yes.
Goebel,
Yes.
Leyva Gonzalez,
Yes.
Tillard,
Yes.
Castle,
Yes.
Bush.
Yes.
Frank is absent. Moreno,
Moreno, yes.
Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Campillo,
Yes.
Whitburn,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
The motion passes with 13 members voting yes, and 1 member absent.
Thank you very much, clerk. All right, great discussion. That brings us to item 13, which is the overnight downtown to border express bus service implementation. This is an informational item, and we'll hand it off to Dennis Desmond once he gets settled in to provide the presentation.
Good morning, board. To my left is Beverly Neff. She is the planner for the South Bay area, and she's the project manager on this exciting new route that we're going to talk about. In December of 2023, the board approved an application plan for our Senate Bill 125 funds. This included there we go. This included a number of service improvements for buses and trolley services, including increasing trolley frequency up to 15 minutes all day on all 3 trolley lines, and 7.5-minute blue line frequency all the way on the entire route during peak periods. Also included funding for our Iris Rapid route, for new Otay Mesa services to be determined, and for restoring service that's at a reduced level now due to driver shortages. We also have additional frequency and span of service on several routes. And what we're here to talk about today, a new express route that would operate between downtown and San Ysidro overnight when the blue line's not operating due to temporal separation rules. The application plan intended that in calendar year 24, we would restore all of the services that have been reduced due to driver shortages. And then in calendar year 25, we would implement all of the new service improvements in the SB 125 application. During that discussion in December, there was interest on the board in looking at expediting the implementation of the overnight downtown to San Ysidro express route. So this route is still conceptual. We're calling it Route 910 here. And it does need some planning work. So we know that it's going to operate between downtown and San Ysidro But where it's going to stop along the route is to be determined. So Beverly's already started the efforts on that. She's pulled data and she's putting a survey together, and we're coming up with an outreach plan. Our hope is to expedite that plan since we do know the starting point and the ending point. We just need to figure out where we're going to be in the middle. We think that we can expedite that so that we can get this going before calendar year 25. We're also looking at impacts on operations, obviously on operators, the operators that will need to work overnight now, which is a new, although we do have late night service now, this will be a new paradigm to have people their entire shift overnight. So this route, because it is a new route, it is considered a major service change under our under our policy 42. So that would require a public hearing and a Title VI analysis. Typically, we do that before we start a new route. However, policy 42 does allow a new route to be operated as a pilot up to 12 months before we can do that process. So we can implement this prior to having that public hearing as a pilot route. Again, we're working on that expedited community engagement process, and we're hoping to have implementation as early as September of this year. That would require an amendment to our SB 125 allocation plan because we're moving those dates around for the implementation of services. So while we're looking at amending that SB 125 application plan, we wanted to look at other possible improvements that are proposed under that SB 125 to see if any of those make sense to also expedite and implement early. So we looked at all of the different improvements. The chart on the table here, sorry, the chart on the slide here, the orange boxes are improvements or restorations that have already been done or are programmed in the first 6 months of this calendar year. And then in the yellow are the remaining service restorations. And then in the green on the far right column are the additional services under SB 125. So we wanted to look at all of those green boxes again to see if there were any that made sense to expedite prior to necessarily restoring all of the services that are at reduced levels. So one of the things we concentrated on was Sunday, when we have several routes that are operating at hourly headways and proposed under SB 125 to bring those up to 30-minute headways. There are 5 such routes, and in the spirit of prioritizing routes serving disadvantaged communities, we looked at where those 5 routes are operating, and 2 of them rose to the top. Route 4 that operates on the Imperial Avenue corridor between downtown and Skyline Hills, and Route 961, which operates between National City and Encanto via Paradise Hills. Both of those are almost entirely operating within disadvantaged communities. And we're defining that by the California Climate Investment Priority Communities, which was largely SB 535 and AB 1550 disadvantaged and low-income communities. So our proposal today, let me step back one step. Routes 4 and 961 again rose to the top as serving primarily disadvantaged communities, almost 100%. Route 4 actually does have some 30-minute service operating in the afternoon on Sundays, while Route 961 is entirely hourly on Sundays. So with that, we wanted to bring 961 to the top. And we have the following proposal, which is to expedite 2 SB 125 service improvements into this calendar year. One is the implementation of that overnight downtown to Border Express route, and the other is to increase that Sunday frequency on Route 961, again, serving National City, Paradise Hills, and Encanto. And then if needed, depending on driver levels at that time, postpone some of the other restoration services, those that you see in the yellow on this table here. And then that would involve filing that amended SB 125 allocation plan with the state of California. So a real quick refresher on Route 961. It operates 7 days a week. Again, National City, Paradise Hills, and Encanto. We operate 30 minutes Monday through Saturday with additional 15-minute service in National City between 24th Street and Plaza Bonita. And then the Sunday frequency again is currently 60 minutes. Saturday, we actually increased in 2017 from 60 to 30 minutes as part of the TOP. This would bring the Sunday service up to match the Saturday. We're currently carrying about 1,400 riders a day on weekdays, almost 1,000 on Saturdays, and just over 500 on Sundays. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Desmond. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
All right, 15-minute frequencies is not that frequent. That's a low standard and it's not even close to being met. Once again, I call attention to the eastbound Green Line trolley that has the longest wait of all the trolleys, especially at night. In fact, one can't go past SDSU after about 10:30 p.m., if I'm not mistaken. And a 30-minute wait or even 1 hour for a bus or a trolley is just unacceptable. That really needs to be a priority to fix. Now, as far as the overnight downtown to Border Express bus, I actually 100% support that. Make sure to include Buyer Boulevard and Iris Avenue and E&H Street as stops. There also needs to be plenty of security at every stop for the entire time this bus is in operation late at night. We don't need a perception of safety. We need safety guaranteed at these dangerous hours of operation, because even 9 p.m. is dangerous. So public transit users' safety at later than midnight needs to be taken very seriously. I even recommend one transit security officer right on each bus if possible. Now, I'm curious, how does the SB 125 money make up for the lack of bus drivers? Are you guys going to use the money to buy robots? Because it's the same unanswered conundrum at Sandag. Everyone keeps talking about increased transit frequency and new transit options, but no one explains who's going to operate the machinery. If it's to be self-driving AI powered, then studies by entities such as AAA have already found self-driving cars to explode dummy bodies into a billion pieces
30
even while
seconds
driving
left.
at slow speeds. But of course, some people at Sandag live in Fantasyland, full of regional planned pipe dreams, while you at MTS have to actually deal with transit realities, including a 19% fare recovery rate, damaged tracks, only a perception of safety, a lack of bus drivers, and a lack of frequency being possible. So I'd really like someone who represents MTS at Sandag to start communicating these realities and get them in the real world with you guys and with the people who have to ride and
Your
deal
time
with
has
the
expired.
realities, like I said.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. This was an informational item, so no motion is needed. We will now open board discussion on this item. We'll begin with Member Moreno and then go to Member Chavez.
We heard this in executive committee, and I just want to thank Desmond and the whole team for really listening to the board on this effort. This was something that a lot of the community was asking for, and rightfully so. And so it's really, the turnaround is just magnificent, and I look forward to seeing this come to fruition. And thank you so much. When will you come back to give us another update?
It's possible that we could do the public hearing, which would ask for board approval of the route, or depending on the timing, we could implement as a pilot, in which case a public hearing would follow the implementation. And then hopefully we'd have a celebration of the start of the route before the public hearing. So just depending on the timing and the
Okay.
board agenda.
Okay. And so just to paint a scenario, if we were to do a pilot versus the first route that you mentioned, when would the route start if we were to do a pilot?
So our intention is to try to start the route in September of this year. So the idea of a pilot is it operates approximately 12 months before you come back to the board and report on performance. We haven't always done that in the past. Sometimes we come to the board before we started the route, such as our Mid-Coast implementation, or sometimes, for example, our Otay Mesa services in the past. We've just asked the board to approve the pilot because it's been so successful right off the bat. So, and I suspect that might be a scenario that we see here. We may not need to wait 12 months before we know that it's successful. But in the event that it lags, we may want to give it some maturation time before we come back and ask for approval to make the route permanent.
Got you. And both the pilot in Otay Mesa and this pilot, I know the pilot in Otay Mesa was championed by Alejandra Miriterran over at the Otay Chamber. I know she was aggressively seeking that with all the warehouses and the businesses. So, and that has been just wildly successful. September, I think, is a good time, especially given the school year for the kids in the South Bay, or the students in the South Bay, I should say. But I thank you for really listening to us and listening to the board and the community on this effort. And I look forward to seeing all the details and being at the grand opening and all that good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Moreno. Member Chavez.
Thank you. And I also want to commend the staff for this quick response and for thinking holistically in each and every solution we can come up with. I also want to throw in that moving forward, we're going to open a university in Chula Vista. It's not so far out. I would love to send that information and maybe also talk about some future routes that would be connecting these students to this university. And, you know, this proactive approach in addressing the need for enhanced transportation, particularly in the San Isidro station with the Blue Line, I always have to advocate for this Blue Line. And I really thank you for thinking of each and every possible solution that we can bring forward, because we do have a floating population and we do have a workforce that keeps San Diego in a partnership with all this community that's a floating population going northbound and southbound every single day. And I just want to be mindful about all the possible and additional possibilities for their transportation, as well as for the workforce that gets out on somewhat unconventional hours after 11:45, after 12 a.m. here in downtown and all these areas that are going south. And I want to thank you again for thinking about this, and maybe we could be in the future a little bit more mindful and when we project these projects. But thank you.
Thank you, Member Chavez. Member Bush.
Yeah, just thank you, staff, again, for, to reiterate the comments of my colleagues for being so timely on this, for coming back. This makes sense. You know, National City has one of the highest riderships of any city in the county. And this is where we're concentrating our investments. So many folks, you know, come from the border region and go back and forth. And so it's addressing that, especially those other hours of the day. Just reiterating my comments from the last meeting, I think making sure that the route that it is expressed, that it is timely. So it's making sure that the stations are spaced out, I think that part is really important. I know you guys are still going to be doing some work there, but yeah, this is a great step forward. It's exciting. Also want to give a shout out to Environmental Health Coalition and all the community-based organizations and community residents who came out and advocated for this. So that advocacy is important. It helps. And yeah, I'm excited to see this through. Great job, staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Bush. All right, seeing no further board communication except for Chair Pro Tem Montgomery.
I know I'm late, Chair. Thank you very much. I also just want to say thank you. There has been a lot of advocacy for Route 961 over the years. I wanted to just ask Dennis a quick question about the transit optimization plan, how that played a part in the decision back in 2017, but how it also plays a part as we move forward. What is the process around gathering new information through to put into the plan? I just wanted to get a little bit more context around how that plays a role and how much we should concentrate on that as we move forward in making these decisions.
Sure. The transit optimization plan is what we call a comprehensive operational analysis, when instead of looking on a route by route basis, you look at the entire system and say, are we allocating all of our resources in the right places where it's best being used? So that's an opportunity. It's usually about every 10 years that a system does that, takes a step back. And so that was an opportunity that we took in 2016, 2017 to really do that. And so that resulted in the reallocation of some of our resources, some of our lower performing services. We took those resources and put them into routes that needed more service or had more potential, and Route 961 was one of those. We took that opportunity to increase the Saturday service. We didn't have enough resources to do Sunday at the time. SB 125 is giving us those resources, so let's do that. And that's something that we do not necessarily on a network-wide basis all the time, but we do it definitely on a route by route basis. And then we take opportunities like the Mid-Coast or Elevate SD or some of these bigger things. That's another chance for us to look a little bit more holistically at what's going on. But we are looking very regularly, every 6 months, every 12 months. You all get a performance monitoring report. That report details all of the performance of every single route. That's when we can take a look and say, where do we need more capacity? Where do we have too much capacity? And make some of those changes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And thank you for all of this work.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp. All right, that was an informational item. We will move on now to another informational item, which is item 14. That is an MTS Safety Performance Targets Annual Review and Update. And we'll invite Fabian Soberg and Jared Garcia to come on up and once you get settled in, to begin your presentation.
So this is fairly new in the reporting to the Board of Directors on this program. This is not new to us, though. We have always had a very brisk and robust safety program, both on the bus and rail side. And this is geared towards, well, obviously passenger safety, but in addition to compliance with all the federal and state laws. But the federal government really kind of put a lot more meat on the bones of the structure of how they want us to report it. And that's why we're bringing this to you today, to kind of, so that you, as the decision makers, are aware of the safety program and that you understand the importance of it to the agency. And if you saw something that you didn't like, then you would want to be alerting the staff to that. But today we have Fabian and Jared to go through it.
Good morning, board members. My name is Fabian Soberg, and I'm the System Safety Manager for REL. Sorry. And alongside me is Jared Garcia, and he is the Manager's Safety for Bus. And so today we're going to talk about our Safety Performance Annual Review, and we'll start off with trolley. So one thing that I want to talk about is the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. This was a requirement under 49 CFR 673. It went into effect in July of 2019, and then we had a compliance extended to July 20th of 2021 due to COVID. Now, the MTS Board of Directors approved the PTAS back on July 30th of 2020. And if there's any changes or updates to the PTAS, we would have the board review it and then approve or deny those updates or changes. The last update that we had was last year with the bipartisan infrastructure law requirements that we included into our PTAS, and we are currently monitoring those updates that we had put into our PTAS. So another requirement of the PTAS is to report on 5 measures that safety is actually required to report on. And what we do with these safety performance measures is we calculate a 3-year calendar year rolling average to establish a baseline. And we're trying to achieve a reduction compared to the previous 3 calendar year average. So what you're looking at right now is we have a table where we have the year range, target, and then 3-year average. So our established baseline for 2017 to 2019 was 0.12 for fatalities. And just to kind of give you a background on how we come up with this number, the FTA has given us a formula where we take the number of fatalities divided by the vehicle revenue miles and multiply that by 100,000 to get the rate per 100,000 miles. So we did see a reduction in our fatalities until 2021 to 2023. We did have an increase on fatalities on our system back in 2023. So last year we had 7 fatalities. 4 of those were determined to be suicides, and then the other 3 were determined to be non-preventable accidents. Later in the presentation, I'll talk about the steps that we're taking to try to reduce that number of suicides on our system. The next measure is injuries. Injuries are considered any individual that is injured on our system or on our equipment that needs to be transported by paramedics for immediate medical attention. So our baseline for that, for the injuries for 2017 and 2019 was 3.47. And as you can see, we have continuously had a reduction in injuries on our system and our equipment. Next is safety events, and safety events are the number of injuries, reportable accidents, substantial damage, and then also fires on our system. So our baseline was 4.65, and we have continuously seen a reduction with safety events, last being 2.39. System reliability. So system reliability is the mileage that the train operates before they experience a train failure. So for these numbers, we actually want to see it increase. We don't want to see a decrease. So our baseline was 10,259, and we are now at 16,194, which that's a testament to our LRV department maintaining our vehicles, allowing us to travel this amount of mileage before experiencing a train failure. And then last is the emergency brake application. So our baseline was 11.51, and I actually see there's a mistake on here. It should be less than, not greater than, so I apologize for that. But we did have a reduction until we hit 2020 to 2022. We had a little bit of an uptick in emergency brake applications, and the reason for that was when Midcoast opened up, we had a lot of new operators operating on our system. So as you can see, the 2021 to 2023, we did see a decrease because those operators are now having, a little more time in the sea. They're relying on their defensive driving training. And so we are seeing a decrease in emergency brake applications. So now I want to show how we compare to other rail agencies in the state. So here you see the chart where we have San Francisco, LA, Sacramento, Santa Clara, and then of course MTS. And we are actually trending very well compared to the other rail agencies in California. For CY 2023, we had a total of 24 accidents. A couple of items that we are working on currently as far as safety enhancements. The first one is Washington Street crossing safety mitigations. So just to give you a little bit of history about Washington Crossing, it's ranked #1 for fatal incidents by the FRA in San Diego County. There was 3 accidents, Amtrak and coaster accidents that were not related to trolley back in 2020, 2021, and September 3rd of 2023. So what we decided to do, and actually our COO, Brian Riley, led the way with this decision, was we decided to get together with NCTD and also MTS, so having an executive and management staff come together on a joint monthly Teams meeting to talk about how we're going to reduce these incidents happening at this crossing. So after a couple months of having these meetings to discuss how we were going to enhance safety at the crossing, the California Public Utilities Commission issued a summary of mitigations and recommendations for the crossing. A lot of these we were already in the process of doing. So a couple of recommendations from the CPUC state oversight was to lower an existing block wall that is in between NCTD tracks and MTS's tracks, for the city to install a pre-signal for vehicle traffic, increase preemption clearance at the intersection, install, relocate, maintain striping and pavement markings, and then prohibit street parking from adjacent from the crossing, install backlights on the warning devices, and then reducing the speed for Amtrak and coaster, which Amtrak and coaster usually would operate at 50 miles an hour through that crossing, and they're now reducing their speed to 35. And then lastly, close the alleyway or convert it to an emergency only access at that location. So just to give you an idea of what that wall looks like that's separating our tracks, this is currently the existing wall that is there. And what our proposed plan is to do is to lower that wall to 4 feet and then put fencing along that wall about 150 feet down. And what this is going to do is increase visibility for passengers that are exiting our trains. So it gives them an idea of like there's another train on approach on those adjacent tracks. Another item that we're going to do is pedestrian channelization. So what we want to do is when our passengers get off our trains, we want to block off the south end of the station and have them actually cross into the middle of the station where there's going to be a walkway. And then as you can see, they're going to continue onto the sidewalk in that area. So we just really want to give them more time to be aware of their surroundings and actually see the warning devices that are in place to let them know that trains are on approach. So a couple additional actions that MTS has taken that was not on the recommendation list is one, onboard train announcements to passengers, which we're currently doing. So any train that is coming into Washington Street Station, The passengers are going to hear this announcement stating use caution when exiting Washington Street Station. Look out for coaster, Amtrak, and freight trains passing through the intersection at high speeds. So this message is played on approach to the station. Also, we have already installed back flashers on existing warning devices. We installed a convex mirror. And then we also placed look both ways on the sidewalk. So here's a picture of the black back flashers warning device. And here's a picture of the convex mirror, where if a passenger does get off the train, they're able to see southbound trains on that adjacent track on approach. And then also here, we have the markings. You can kind of see the markings where it says, watch for trains. I'm always surprised when people look both ways on the street, but they don't look both ways on the tracks. So we're trying to let people know, hey, take a look, there's going to be a train on approach. Another item that we're working on is Beardsley Grade Crossing. So in 2023, we had 9 vehicles get stuck on our tracks at this crossing. So what we did was we came up with an index card to give out to our line supervisors to get more specific questions. Like we knew cars were getting stuck on the track, but we want to know why they're getting stuck on the track. So one of the main things that we wanted to know, what was the reason that the driver gave why they turned onto our tracks and got stuck? Were they using GPS services? Was the driver impaired? Was it a signage, lighting issue? So as you can see on the picture, the contributing factor was lighting. It's very, very dark in that area. This is a picture of our grade crossing when the gates are up and the warning devices aren't going off. It's extremely dark. So I want to show you a video of a near miss incident that we had at a grade crossing that involved a vehicle getting stuck on the tracks. Our operator did a phenomenal job stopping short of that vehicle. And I'll just have you guys take a look. So that was too close of a call, you know. So not only did the operator stop short of the vehicle, but she stopped short of the person who was trying to flag him down to stop short of that vehicle. So one thing we have done as well to try to get lighting in this area is we sent out a letter to the city of San Diego, and we gave them the data that we collected as far as the reason why drivers are saying they're turning on the tracks, and then also the information about the lighting. So we requested additional lighting in that area. That letter was sent out in January, so we asked that they respond back within 60 days with any recommendations or help with that lighting issue. So they have a little bit more time. But in the meantime, what we did was we refreshed our edge markings at that grade crossing with a thermoplastic paint. So when the headlights of a vehicle illuminate on that line, it's actually going to be really bright and hopefully guide them across the tracks and not onto our tracks. Since we made this improvement, we haven't had any vehicles stuck on the track, and then we'll continue to monitor that. Another item is our internal safety and security audit. For 2023, we do the audit every year. There's a total of 23 elements, and we break that up within a 3-year process. This year, we had 8 elements, and as you can see, they're listed on the screen. And I'm happy to report that we did not have any findings during that audit. And then lastly, like I mentioned earlier, the steps that we're taking to try to reduce the number of suicides on our system. So the FTA had issued a safety advisory 22-4, which recommends that transit agencies post signage where they have had attempted suicides or suicides. So the table that you see is from the orange line, green line, and blue line, where we have confirmed that there have been suicides in those locations. So what we did was we posted signs in stations near those areas, and then we also posted signs on the right of way as well. to just, really give people information on how they can seek help if they feel like they want to harm themselves. So those are the items that I have for trolley. Does anybody have any questions for me? Good.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to bus safety, and then we'll do public comment and then board comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Jared Garcia. I'm the safety manager for bus. So our bus performance targets were previously set to improve upon our 3-year baseline, which was from 2018 to 2020. As Fabian had mentioned, the BIL changed that to a 3-year rolling average. The targets do not consider fault or preventability and are based on revenue miles. And in calendar year 2023, we traveled just under 22 million miles. So the first performance target is fatalities. The original baseline was an aspirational goal of 0. Our 3-year average was 1 fatality per calendar year. And in 2023, we had 1 fatality. This was ruled to be non-preventable on the operator's behalf. And for the rate, the baseline was the aspirational goal of 0. The 3-year rolling average was a 0.004. And the calendar year 2023 was a 0.005, which was slightly higher due to a slight reduction in vehicle revenue miles traveled in 2023 compared to 2022. For injuries, these are essentially NCD reportable events where an individual is transported from the accident scene by ambulance or other means for immediate medical attention. And our baseline average was 140. The 3-year rolling average was 98. And in 2023, we had 69. The average was a 0.51 for the original baseline, a 0.44 for the 3-year rolling average, and a 0.32 for last year. Next performance target is safety events. This is whether there's an injury or not. The other main category that contributes to this number is if a vehicle is towed away from the scene due to disabling damage. So our baseline average was 143. The 3-year rolling average was 107. And in 2023, the total was 91. And for the rate for the baseline was 0.55. The 3-year rolling average was 0.43. And in calendar year 2023 was a 0.42. The last performance target is system reliability. This is intended to measure state of good repair. Our baseline average was rounded to the nearest 100 miles and was 6,600 miles. The 3-year rolling average was 7,563, and in 2023 was 6,553, so a little bit lower than our baseline average and as well as the 3-year rolling average. So all of these events, as well as other accidents that may not necessarily meet NCD reportable events, are reviewed by our internal accident review committee. And we look at preventability to look and see if there are things we can do to try and reduce the number of accidents. So for the performance targets, only 14% were deemed to be preventable for this last calendar year, and 86 were non-preventable. Typical years usually range between about 10 and 20% for preventability rate. So this is pretty kind of in the middle of the road for historical averages. To get a better understanding of what types of accidents these are, I break them down into just 2 categories, whether it's a vehicle collision or a slip, trip, and fall. Last year was pretty close to 50-50. Most years, slips, trips, and falls are usually around 60-65%, and collisions are usually a little bit lower of a percentage. But this number did move since we had such a low number of events this year compared to our 3-year average. That kind of changed the numbers. So aside from the performance targets, we historically have looked at all accidents and preventability. This is part of Board Policy 42. And in FY23, our preventable accident rate was a 1.15. This number was higher than the prior 2 years, which saw less traffic and less passengers due to the pandemic. And so while this number is higher than the prior 2 years, historically, this is still a relatively low number and is 18% overall decrease compared to FY14, which is the last 9 years. Another thing that we look at is our preventable accident rate for our rapid routes. This is part of our performance incentive program. And in FY23, we had a 0.13 preventable accident rate per 100,000 miles, which was the lowest number since we implemented rapid services in FY15. And that is a 76% reduction from when we started rapid services. One of the things that we've reported on last year was the El Cajon bus-only lane. This was originally implemented in 2020 as a pilot project and was part of Sandag's vision for the Mid-City Rapid Project. And the primary goal was to improve travel time and on-time performance through the corridor. We have experienced more consistent travel times and improved on-time performance with a reduction in travel time. There have been 0 pedestrian or bike accidents since these lanes have been implemented. However, the accident rate has increased, as well as the number of passenger falls due to braking to avoid a collision from cars turning in front of buses. In 2023, we did see a decrease in the severity of the accidents and passenger falls, and there were no events that involved either a tow truck or an ambulance. When we first implemented this project, we immediately noticed the increase in accidents and began training all of the employees that did that route and all employees in general. We worked with the city to change the signage. The original signage did not tell motorists that they could turn from the bus lane. So now the signs all say that it is okay to make a right turn. We've also increased the amount of training that we do for all of our bus operators, from onboarding as new hires to our annual 8-hour verification of transit training, or what we call VTT, safety certification. So that is a required component every year. And we've also leveraged our dedicated fleet of rapid buses and installed a decal warning motorists not to make a right turn in front of the bus. And due to those efforts, we've seen an 18% reduction since the first year when we implemented this bus-only lane. And we'll continue to implement mitigation efforts to try and further reduce this number. One of the pilot projects that we started on this last May was the pilot testing of electronic mirrors on 2 of our buses. This is a product that's already in use in Europe and Canada, but has not gained full approval by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And so this pilot project is one of the steps that the manufacturers need to try and see if they can get full approval. So over about the last 7 months, 15% of our operators have driven one of these 2 buses and submitted a survey. And during that time, we have not experienced any vehicle collisions with these 2 buses or had any reported electronic failures or loss of power to the system. And 87% of the operators would recommend this product. And the most common response and why they liked it was the improved visibility that provided around the bus. Of the 13% who would not recommend the product, The most common negative comments were the location of the monitor on the left-hand side, which is the picture on the left. They felt that it was too distracting and also that it could be too bright at night. One of the parameters for this pilot project is because it doesn't have full approval, is that we could not block a view of the existing mirrors. So we were limited with the placement of these mirrors on the left-hand side. If these electronic mirrors were to eventually replace traditional mirrors, we would be able to locate that monitor further away to where the monitor is not so close to being in front of the driver. The other thing that we could have improved upon initially was the drivers didn't realize that there's a slide on the bottom of the monitor to where they could adjust the brightness. So some of the operators that were saying that it was too bright at night didn't realize that they could adjust how bright it was at night. Another pilot project that we began testing on was a thermal camera for our battery electric bus charger. This is a one camera test that we installed that uses our existing security system and was mostly funded by our excess liability insurance coverage company. And the goal of this is that while the battery electric buses do have a telematic system to warn you if a bus is overheating, we're looking for a way to look and see if there's an added layer of redundancy that could warn us if we did have a bus that was overheating while on the charger. So far, what we've learned in the last couple of months is that the current camera has some configuration challenges. The first one that we learned was both the viewing angle as well as the software is only set up to set up square monitoring areas. And so unless you're directly in line with the way the buses are parked, you get this angle where it'll pick up moving buses. And so you can see in that picture, kind of in the top left, you will see a CNG bus exhaust that's glowing orange. And so that's been triggering the system to say that something's overheating when in fact it's not. This is something that once we transition over to overhead chargers, might be improved upon to where we can more easily mount cameras directly over the battery electric buses. Another component of our safety program is our annual CHP inspection and audit. CHP goes to each of our 5 bus yards every year and reviews everything from our vehicle maintenance and inspects the vehicles to commercial licensing, drug testing, hours of service, et cetera. And all 5 of our bus terminals successfully passed the inspection this last year. Lastly, I wanted to highlight our frontline employees. Every year for about the last 18 years, we've had a Safe Driver Award program. But this year we expanded the safety awards to include all of our frontline maintenance employees, as well as our frontline passenger support services staff. And we recognized, I believe it was over 270 bus operators with the Safe Driver Award. We had 10 bus operators receive the National Safety Council's Million Mile Award, which is 25,000 hours of driving without a preventable accident. We had over 120 maintenance employees receive the safety award, and we had 25 passenger support services also receive the safety award. And with that, we'll turn it over to questions and comments.
Thank you both for those reports. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, apparently the federal government safety standards are subpar at best, negligent at worst, or at least maybe that's the excuse you guys can use. I've heard this term robust often referring to plans that don't work. MTS providing a report ahead of time is actually as reliable as the public transit though. But I'm gonna start with the trolley, the bad news. 7 suicides. How many violent attacks? Because safety events really needs to be broken down. Why are there fires? And why are there constant trolley failures? Is it just the electrical grid overload or the trolleys in need of repair? If MTS is doing better than other California counties' public transit systems, then public transit in California is a failed experiment. And you guys are talking about the trolley tracks. Apparently loud horns save people's lives. I don't know about prohibiting parking adjacent to the lines, if that's going to help. I think it would fulfill San Diego's dream. The short wall in between NCTD and MTS tracks sounds good depending on what it looks like, since I couldn't see. That announcement at Washington Street isn't coming. It already exists, and I'm glad that it does, but I recommend it for areas like County Center, Little Italy, and Santa Fe Depot, because there are many tourists that don't know anything about the trains until they hear them. The lighting should have been an obvious need when the trolley was first installed, lighting for both drivers and people walking. The better news, buses remain safer. Now that bus only lane in El Cajon, the accident rate has increased. Thanks for that true info. But that no signage still just proves how obsessed people are at Sandag with
30 seconds
deterring and
left.
de-incentivizing people from driving. I'm gonna use that info too. I'm gonna have to try and fit it in tomorrow. And then you were talking about buses overheating on the chargers. That's the combustible lithium at work. That's why electric things that are based on lithium batteries are very dangerous, because they can overheat, they can catch fire, and it's a very serious concern. Thank you guys for this report. I'd like more details, breakdowns of what some of these incidents are. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. This was an informational item, so no motion is needed. We'll now open board discussion on this item with Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Can we go back to slide 23, please? Performance targets, injuries. So I'm looking at MTS versus TransDev. The far right-hand column is the rate, which kind of normalizes the things. 0.34 for MTS, 0.32. Seems like that's a good thing, that everybody's being trained the same way, or what can you tell us about MTS operations versus TransDev operations? Training, safety training, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so we both have a comprehensive safety training program. They are a little bit different, being that they're being conducted by different personnel, and TransDev has their kind of national standardized training. Some of that is customized specific to San Diego and the routes, the vehicle types that they're offering, et cetera. But they cover essentially the same topics. They are delivered a little bit differently, but it is outlined in our agency safety plan. There are some differences, but they are very similar.
Sounds good. Let's go to slide 25, please. The far right-hand column, the blue shaded current year 2023. This says distance between major mechanical failures. The MTS buses run about 6,000 miles between things, but the TransDev buses run 5,300. Any idea why there's a difference?
There's a difference every year. There are a couple factors at play. One of them is that we do operate a different fleet. We have a different mix of articulated buses versus 40-foot buses. An extra axle can change the number of components that can lead to failures. I know that some of the things that we've seen an increase in failures with are just electrical faults in general of different electrical components within buses. We have a pretty significant number of buses, our 600 series and 2900 series buses that are past their 12-year scheduled useful life, and they're currently on year 13, and we've seen an increase in failures for those buses. Another thing that I know that we've worked on in the past is that we transitioned to steel pistons a couple of years ago to try and reduce the number of engine failures. And that by doing so, we've now kind of exposed the weakest link in the engine compartment, which is cylinder head failures. So those are some of the things that have contributed to these numbers.
So I'm hearing that the type of bus that TransDev uses, the age of the bus that TransDev uses versus MTS buses could be why you were getting less miles on the MTS buses less miles on the Transdev than the MTF buses. Am I hearing that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank
First off, I think Jared's going to put me out of a job. He covered almost all of it. So great job. Yeah, no, that really is the crux of it. With COVID, we actually had to delay our procurements. And based on our vehicle replacement plans, because we had a surplus of vehicles for a while as we reduced service. Now, as we've extended service back, we re-implemented that. So we had about a 9-month pause on our procurement, which resulted in, as Jared had mentioned, vehicles going past their useful life. And Transdev may have been the recipient for some of those. There's a few different factors when the reliability fluctuates. The average speed of the system, you probably heard the phrase that, my car, it's all freeway miles. Well, vehicles tend to be more reliable as the speed increases. And so as we're coming out of COVID, the speed is actually reducing a little bit because of, more ridership and more traffic. The other factor does play into it a little bit. Although the zero emission buses have been performing very well, historically, they're not a one-for-one comparison. So depending on where those vehicles lie, they tend to live in that division, whether it's be contracted or in-house, has a bit of a factor. So a fluctuation is somewhat expected.
Okay, thank you all for the information.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Any other board discussion? Member Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a very, very specific question around the bus-only lane on El Cajon Boulevard. So apologies in advance because it's super niche, but and this is somewhat related to the bus itself, but also how we can use the bus-only lane to create more safety in the area. So Julio on my team was doing some research. He saw that some school buses around the country use stop arm cameras that essentially catch cars violating traffic laws when they're near a school bus. And the cameras help process and give tickets to those drivers. So I'm wondering if there's any transit agencies that use similar technology on their buses.
Yeah. The answer is yes. Predominantly, that technology is used for people parking in bus-only lanes or prohibiting their ability to service a stop. Like New York has a pretty extensive program on that. We've looked at some of that. That's usually not the issue we have in the bus-only lane. It's confusion with the general public trying to decide when they can get in that lane to make that last right turn. And the city has been a good coworker with us and trying to make some enhancements as we're all kind of learning. We have bus-only lanes and protected guideways and stuff that are a little easier to manage, but when you're trying to put it on the right side and you have parking and you have bike lanes, it's been a bit of a learning curve, so hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I've seen the cameras related to parking.
Right.
It's interesting to me, the idea of being able to use them for moving violations as well. That boulevard, there's just a lot of, so there's the ridership, but there's also a lot of pedestrian traffic. That pedestrian traffic also happens to include a lot of students and seniors, especially with the some of the recent housing developments that have been put in, making it even more important that there's safety, that we do as much as we can to ensure traffic safety. And a lot of those folks ride transit as well. So the ecosystem there, making it as safe as possible is a real priority of ours. I'm curious to what extent we may be able to collaborate with the city of San Diego to bring forward red striping for the entirety of the bus-only lane. We know that that's something that they do in San Francisco and seems to be pretty effective in signaling to motorists that that's not a place for them to drive.
Yeah, we've done that on the freeways with great success, and I think we've even looked at that as possibly at Park Avenue. But Jared, I don't know if you could expand on that, but we have been exploring that option, and we will also look into the cameras.
Dennis has been heavily involved with the city on this because there is a goal to do it in multiple areas of the city.
Thank you. Yes, it's something we've discussed with the city. This was a pilot project in El Cajon Boulevard, and the red paint is very expensive. So the idea wasn't to make that investment. It is actually not only just a bus only lane. However, it's also available for cars for parking and to make right turns, accessing driveways and things like that. So it's a little bit different than what we have on Interstate 15, where it is actually buses only. Cars are allowed in this lane under certain circumstances. It's something we'll continue to explore. As Sharon mentioned, Park Boulevard would be a good possible use case for that. It's expensive. There are some wear issues. San Francisco has some red paint on their lanes, but they've had a lot of problems with that paint peeling up and wearing off and has to be repainted quite often.
I appreciate that. I'd love for us to be able to think creatively about how we can, achieve the same outcome. As I mentioned, that particular stretch of Elkhorn Boulevard in District 9 at least, heavily trafficked by pedestrians, lots of young folks who want to ride transit. And the more that we can do to make that just a safe, the entire stretch as safe as possible, to slow cars down, to make the bus rides obviously as safe as possible, I think would be better for everyone. And there's certainly a reason to invest from a city perspective in that. And I think MTS would benefit as well. So would love to be able to partner closely with you on that.
Just one final comment with that. The issue we're having is with vehicles turning at the last second across the bus lane, and that they're not occupying the lane 200 feet before making a turn. The vehicle code requires vehicles to occupy the rightmost lane up to 200 feet before making a right turn, whether it's a bus only lane or a bike only lane. And so the question is by painting the bus lane red, will that encourage vehicles to enter the lane or continue to turn across it?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, certainly sounds like a design challenge, but also something that with good design we could potentially prevent that from happening as well. I'm probably not the person to figure that design out, but I trust that there are people smarter than me who could, and would love to be able to collaborate with you all on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Ela Rivera. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation and congratulations on the safety indicators trending in the right direction. It's very good to see. So thank you. That was an informational item, so no motion required on that. We're going to move on to item number 15, and that is for chair and board member and CEO communications. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, poor Sharon had to approve a whole bunch of work because of the city of San Diego's criminal negligence in cleaning the storm channels or repairing the aging and damaged pump stations. They knew Chelios Creek needed cleaning, and they still denied recommending it be cleared. It was an unnatural, preventable disaster caused by decades of bad leadership in the city of San Diego. Very sad. I actually talked to a homeless woman who told me she had water up to her waist near 12th and Imperial. And about a week ago, I went and had a look at those repairs by MTS going on for the Orange Line trolley. I saw bulldozers along with other machinery in all the ruined streets that now MTS now has to pay to fix. Well, not the street. I got to tell you, waiting 25 minutes for a shuttle in between Lemon Grove and Euclid is absolutely unacceptable. There needs to be multiple bus shuttles going back and forth to meet the 15-minute substandard standard. Please take this seriously, as this affects so many people already struggling to recover from the storm damage and no longer have a home to live in or a car to drive. There's also no clearly marked signage to tell people where to wait for that bus shuttle. So I'm glad that at least there were some MTS workers telling riders that it was the end of the line, because usually MTS provides zero updates on anything. Other than that, thank you for your report of all of the extra spending that has to happen. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Let's begin our board member comment with Member Leyva Gonzalez.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to continue on with the comments in regards to looking forward to receiving the ridership numbers for the Rapid 227 bus in Imperial Beach. Once again, I want to thank MTS, Sharon, and some of the staff in regards to meeting, but moving forward, really looking forward to looking at the numbers and meeting once again and formulating a plan and really getting this resolved, because continuously at each council meeting, we get a large number of residents that are concerned. So the whole moving it and all those issues, I just want to be on record saying that I'm really looking forward to, and I'm very optimistic that we're going to get this resolved and hopefully very soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Lehman Gonzalez. All right, Member Gastel.
Yeah, thank you so much. As the Lemon Grove representative, I want to thank MTS for putting together the shuttle and keeping us, I was going to say on track, but unfortunately that wouldn't be the right word. Keeping us on our route despite the lack of a track to use. But I live near Massachusetts Station. I consider that my station. And I took the trolley here, and it usually takes 20 minutes. It took a little bit more than 30 minutes, not that much difference. What I thought was a little bit funny and interesting was that the bus route from Massachusetts Trolley Station to Euclid takes much longer than the trolley. I hadn't fully appreciated the efficiency of the straight line and nothing in the way that the trolley offers. It really gives you a good illustration of how the trolley is so efficient getting from point A to point B and point C, as opposed to the bus with all the stops and turns and whatnot. I was also impressed. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was a little bit surprised that the bus was pretty close to full. People are using this. People did not give up on their trolley. And as an Orange Line person, I'm really glad to see that our community still, uses the Orange Line even when it gets off track. So thank you. And I'm sorry if somebody said this and I missed it, but I was wondering when we're going to get back on track. So any updates on that would be appreciated. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Member Gastel. Well, that seems like a great segue to our CEO report.
Yes. I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of some of the damage that occurred with the January 22nd storm. Luckily, we did not have any damage with this week's storms. So, I had to constantly wake myself in the morning and hope for the best, but that was good. So we suffered extensive track damage all the way from Lemon Grove to Euclid. The worst of it was really at 65th Street. At that location, the failure of the channel next to the tracks really impacted the ability to run trains through there. But there were multiple other locations as well. You can go ahead and put that slide up. So this is the before slides. We wanted to show you just how extensive the damage was. There's about 750 feet worth of wall that failed along this section of the Orange Line. Very extensive damage. Euclid to Lemon Grove, all of our drains were impacted by the mud and everything else that built up. At Euclid, they had these containers that washed down and basically created a dam at the city's culvert under the street, and it just became this huge overflow. Our entire transit center was covered in muck and mud, as were all of the drains. I know the Jacobs Center was heavily impacted, et cetera. So it didn't just impact the Orange Line. It was the worst on the Orange Line. The Blue Line had sinkholes that caused us to have to stop service while we had to repair those. In addition, the Green Line had them as well. Ultimately, I did send updates to you all, so you have a lot of the details, but I did want to show you some of the recovery we've been doing since then. So again, here's the 65th Street damage. As you can see, the rails are basically floating in the air, which is never a good thing for a rail. Go on to the next slide. This is the work we've been doing. We immediately got out there and hired a metal sheet pile company to come in. They were able to deploy immediately. We did it under an emergency waiver that we're allowed to get through the Federal Transit Administration based on an emergency situation. So we authorized that immediately, started work immediately. And this is what you can see today is that, I don't know why there's the North County. Anyway, ignore the North County Transit District. They're always trying to interfere. That's a joke in case they're listening. Anyway, so you can see this is not going to be a permanent solution. The permanent solution will be worked out with the city of San Diego to do something about that channel. But for now, this will allow us to get to a point where we can operate trains. Our ultimate, right now, we had assumed we'd be able to get into operation by this week. Unfortunately, it's a lot more difficult than anticipated, so it's going to be probably closer to February 17th. What we're doing is we're just trying to communicate that to our customers, and to the point that Board Member Gastel made. The customers get it. This was a once in a lifetime type of event, and so, well, hopefully, and therefore they are a lot more patient. Next slide. We have, this is just to show you all the rest of the damage, lots of this happening, and we have a lot of the ballast, for instance, which is the rocks that help support the rails as the trains go over. That all got contaminated by a lot of mud, a lot of it got washed away. Go on. And we've been doing a lot of track restoration work. We have a couple other contractors helping us, including the sheet pile contractor. And we had existing contracts in place with them, and so they were able to deploy very quickly. We moved them away from some of the projects that were more of state of good repair projects that we were already going to engage in to try to get us up to the point of operations. Next slide. And so here you can see the extent to the restoration happening. We had significant damage in our our train maintenance facilities. The two buildings that we operate our maintenance functions in, both were completely underwater. Unfortunately, a lot of the mechanical stuff is under the ground because, you know, you drive the train on top of it, and then the mechanics will work underneath the trains. So we lost hoists or lifts, and we lost, more importantly, these two wheel truing machines, which are essential for maintaining safe operation of the trains. They basically make sure that the wheels are all working optimally on the track so that you don't get any derailments or things like that. Next slide. Brian Riley, through his connections in the industry, was able to convince his colleagues at the Boston MBTA to loan us a wheel truing machine that's a portable one, and it's already here on property. So that they've loaned it to us for free for 2 years. So that will help us with our efforts to try to continue that preventative maintenance program. Next slide. So all of the damage, you know, it's everything from all of the things that I talked about, but there's a million other things. We rolled it up to about $22 million worth of damage that we gave that estimate to the county's Office of Emergency Services, who gave it to the California State Office of Emergency Services, who gave it to FEMA. We also had a meeting here on site for multiple hours where our teams were meeting with FEMA and OES and Cal OES to go through the damage that we were experiencing. And that is all something that will hopefully assist the region in getting some a FEMA announcement of an emergency, and therefore be able to bring some funds to the region, not just for MTS. You know, we have some insurance. We're still working through how much of the insurance will cover this, but also for the residents who possibly did not have insurance and therefore could get some assistance through the federal FEMA assistance program. With that, I do want to mention that we did, the executive committee approved the expenditure of up to $50,000 for transit passes for those people who were impacted by the storms, especially those in the storm impact zones, but also those who lost their vehicles due to the flooding. And that we have a transit pass program that was, we have now distributed passes to 6 different CBOs who are working with the victims of the storms. And I can tell you, and put this on the record in case anyone's listening in, Thrive Lemon Grove, the Mountain View Local Assistance Center, the Urban Collaborative, Spring Valley Community Alliance, the Ministries of Jerusalem, Equus San Diego Regional Homeless Assistance Program. Those are the 6 that we're working with, and I will, after this meeting, send you all an email so that you have the names of those. What we did was we loaded $72 worth of money onto a Pronto card. That allows them, so if they only are going to use it to get to the assistance program, that way they'll have the funds for later. Or if they want to buy a monthly pass, they can buy a monthly pass. So that's the program for now. We wanted to prop it up as quickly as possible, and we can adjust as needed in the future. I think that's the last of the slides. For that, I went to Washington this week. I was there Tuesday and Wednesday. On Tuesday, I met with all of our legislators, most of our legislators, I should say. I met with Jacobs, Vargas, and Peters. I also met with the senators' staff for Butler and Padilla's offices. The main highlight of why I was there was to talk to them about getting funding through the Transit Emergency Relief Program or a FEMA declaration as quickly as possible. And so I really went through extensively with them. Congressmember Vargas was well aware of the damage. He was actually in his district. He assisted pushing cars out of the flooding himself. So that there was that, but I wanted to show the extent of the damage to MTS so that they were aware. There is an emergency relief program at the Federal Transit Administration. It's authorized, but not appropriated. It just ran out. There were a lot of storms last year, the year before, so all that funding just was completely drawn down by others. But the nice thing about this program is that it's once it gets appropriated, we would be eligible to then submit all of our receipts from this past storm. So it's a pay after the fact type of program. It would allow us to pay for things like the bus bridge that is currently running for the Orange Line. If we provided, as we did, evacuation services for the homeless shelters. Other things involved could be the wheel truing machine replacements if our insurance doesn't cover everything. The nice thing too is they have a resiliency program. And I met with the Federal Transit Administration head of the program, Tom Wilson. He told me about this resiliency aspect of this, which means that if there was a flood and they appropriate funding to this program, then we could actually harden our yard. If we have some ideas about how to harden the yard, improve how we do the wheel truing machines, all those kinds of things, if it was to move our equipment to a different location, those would all be eligible expenses. So that's something that we will definitely be looking at. I'll be working with Brian and his team to see if there are options. So they even mentioned, the things we did in the past to try to harden the yard. Those could have been eligible for a submittal if we have this emergency assistant appropriation. One other caveat they made was that frequently the FTA doesn't, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a FEMA declaration, the FTA can make the calculation that this was so detrimental to transit that we're going to fund the transit operator for the damage. So that's something that we can look to as well. So we'll be trying to take advantage of that in the future. Another thing I did while I was there, very busy. Yesterday, the White House had invited me to a roundtable that was designed, well, it's called the roundtable on clean bus manufacturing. And it was really precipitated by the fact that, 10 years ago, we had 10 different bus manufacturers in North America building buses. We now have 2. And so the problem is, and then 2 just went out of business. 1 just didn't even bother. El Dorado, they just closed up shop and fired all their employees and went bankrupt. And these are companies who've been in the industry for, decades and decades. So their concern is, what is making this happen? The biggest manufacturer in North America is New Flyer, well, NFI, but it's New Flyer and a conglomerate of other entities. But they had to get assistance from the Canadian government. It's a Canadian company, but they do manufacture in the United States. So very big concern in the industry if you can't get a bus. But with the goals of the president to move towards zero emission technology as quickly as possible, that really hinders that, because you really need to start turning over buses rapidly. One of the head of transit for New York said, we have 6,000 buses to transition to zero emission technology. We have our 700 to transition. Chicago Transit, all of the big agencies, they make big purchases. So if they're waiting to get asking for 400 buses, what's the likelihood of MTS being able to get in line for the 50? So we really want to bolster the industry and help them help us get to our goals of zero emission technology. And so that was really the focus of the roundtable. The president's chief national climate advisor came. It was that important to him. And, the deputy chief of staff for the president was there. There were about 35 of us from the industry. And really, it's kind of a situation. New Flyer said that it's not just the fact that, these are a big turnover of buses, but it's also the supply chain. New Flyer said they have 700 buses sitting on a lot waiting for parts. And that tells you that they have invested in 700 buses, and they finance buses, just like everybody else, through the market of business loans and things like that. And with the higher interest rates, that means their carrying costs have risen exponentially. It's really a challenge. And so one of the things that came out of the whole meeting was that they have asked all the transit agencies to try to join together and do joint procurements, to do things like progress payments on the buses, so that when you get to a certain threshold of the build of a bus, that we would pay them for that and then continue on. We've already done that here at MTS. We saw the challenges they were facing early on in the pandemic, when 30% of all procurements were canceled by the industry. And so we, in our last procurements, actually did go towards progress payments, indexing it based on the CPI increases and things like that. We're already there. The joint procurement aspect of it is a great idea. A lot of it stems from the way we've always purchased rail cars. And so we'll be looking towards that as well. And once I talk with our team about it, we'll see how we can advance that as well. So I think that's it for my, sorry it's so long.
No, thank you. Appreciate that update. Thank you for going out there and having all those conversations and meetings. I think it benefits us that you are now the chair of the statewide California Transit Association, particularly with everything that our state is going through regarding transit right now. I want to express thanks to you and to your leadership team and to the entire MTS staff. You talked about some of the infrastructure damage that the agency suffered as a result of the storms, but there was also a remarkable human element to the MTS response. And many of the board members may have seen the photographs, but if not, this area was submerged around here. I mean, it was deep water. The shelter for people experiencing homelessness over at 16th and Newton had deep water in it, and those folks had to be evacuated. And MTS staff literally formed a human chain from here all the way over to that shelter and helped to guide people this way, because there's tracks and all kinds of stuff that are trip hazards and everything else when you can't see because of the water. And MTS staff guided those people to the parking structure and then transported them up to Balboa Park and the activity center, where those folks are still today being helped and assisted, because that shelter over there is still unusable. So I just was really proud of the MTS staff for jumping into action during the course of that disaster and helping those folks. And then another thing you didn't mention here is that MTS has been very helpful in providing transportation in the wake of the flooding, not only with the passes to help folks, but also transporting people to some of those assistance centers. And that's very much appreciated. So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you to the entire team for stepping up in that way. Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steff.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to quickly say thank you to Sharon too. We've had several conversations. And in addition to all of what the chair just mentioned, there's also been an element of taking folks that have been heavily impacted by the storms to hotels from where they landed, whether that be the Jackie Robinson YMCA or other places. And at least, you know, being there, whether they needed MTS or not, the agency has been there for people. So there's just so much more work and so much more devastation that we have to figure out how we're going to recover together. But in that immediate response, that rapid response, I just want to say thank you to everyone here, and thank you to Sharon for jumping on these various issues that have been really nonstop. I've seen folks working out at 65th and Imperial, or between Imperial and Aikens, nonstop. And so I just want to thank you again for jumping into action.
Thank you very much, Chair Pro Tem. All right. Oh, Member Leyva Gonzalez.
Thank you. I want to piggyback on Supervisor's comments on thanking you, Sharon. I have one question. The contractor that is out there doing the emergency, installing the soldier beams and doing all the shoring, what's the name of the contractor? Blue Iron. Blue Iron? Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And with that, we are going to transition into closed session. Before we do that, let's see if there's any public comment on our closed session agenda. Clerk?
Sorry, technical difficulties.
Oh, okay.
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
This is MTS listening in. Nah, just kidding, but I love that great extensive report. The first case is Lourdes Maria Guerra versus MTS, a doe trolley driver and a train operator, Brandon Holma. We've got another car accident with the trolley, apparently. Add that to the report earlier. I'm curious if this case has any relation to the annoying train horns everyone now has to suffer hearing downtown all day and night, because I can't tell you how many workers in the area are frustrated. In my research, I found that last year, Lourdes had another lawsuit and an attempted temporary restraining order. I didn't dig too deep into that case. And the second case is labor negotiations with the Amalgamated Transit Union. The people with the Canadian flag patches, I remember learning that from MTS. Thank you. The ATU derived from the American Federation of Labor with their president, socialist Samuel Gomper, who supported the racist Chinese Exclusion Act. The union's second president, William Mahone, was on the National Civic Federation, which worked with monopolists like Andrew Carnegie and President Cleveland. William openly infiltrated churches with public-private or fascist propaganda. So there you go. That's what I found on those two cases. Not too much, especially that first one. I would have thought there would have been more. So last thing to say to you guys is Chúc Mừng Năm Mới, and that means Happy Lunar New Year in Vietnamese. Hope you guys have a great closed session. Bye. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Our next Board of Directors meeting is scheduled for March 14th at 9 o'clock in the morning. And at this time, we'll move into closed session.
So we update all the comparisons.
Yeah, I just did something when you did that, yeah.
All right, reporting out of closed session on agenda item 18, closed session conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, Lourdes Maria Guerra versus MTS. The board received a report and gave instructions to legal counsel. As it relates to item number 19, closed session conference with labor negotiators regarding San Diego Transit Corporation and the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1309. The board received a report, gave instructions to negotiators, and also approved a tentative agreement with the ATU on a vote with 13 members in favor and 2 absent. The members in favor were Bush, Dillard, Donovan, Elo Rivera, Frank, Gastel, Campillo, Goebel, Hall. You know what? Correct that. Frank was absent, so I'm going to start over again just so that the record is clear. I apologize. Bush, Dillard, Donovan, Elo Rivera, Gastel, Goebel, Campillo, Hall, Leyba Gonzalez, Chavez, Montgomery Stepp, Moreno, and Whitburn were all in favor, and members Frank and Gonzalez were absent.
This meeting is now adjourned.